Here's today's First Word Daily Devotion.
Today is one of those episodes that if you have little ears listening, you may want to have them turn away, or you may want to turn this podcast off until a more appropriate time. And let's be clear, the Bible's not vulgar, the Bible's not dirty, but there may be some sensitive topics that you're just not ready yet for your little one. And so let's start then in 2 Chronicles 29 through 30. Hezekiah began to reign when he was 25 years old, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abihab, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord according to all that David his father had done. In the first year of his reign, in the first month, he opened the doors of the house of the Lord and repaired them. He brought in the priests and the Levites and assembled them in the square on the east and said to them, "Hear me, Levites, consecrate yourself and consecrate the house of the Lord, the God of your fathers, and carry out the filth from the holy place. For our fathers have been unfaithful, and have done what was evil in the sight of the Lord our God. They have forsaken him, and have turned away their faces from the habitation of the Lord, and turned their backs." Now that's a lot of language. That's specific language. Here Hezekiah is, just like we saw with the previous king, when the people go astray, they neglect the house of God. And so Hezekiah is coming to bring necessary repairs to the temple. And of course, the temple is not the thing. The temple is a sign of the thing. The temple then becomes this reference point to the people's heart. As the people's heart has neglected the Lord, so they have neglected the physical temple. But notice the language, in particular, the reason that Paul's going to say what he's going to say in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, when he's going to talk about marriage and what the Bible calls conjugal rights. The reason the Bible uses this language corresponds with what we learn from the plight of the Israelites in 2 Chronicles. What is it? They have been, look at the language, unfaithful. They have turned their backs from the Lord God. But look over to verse 25 here, in I guess this is still 2 Chronicles 29, and look at these names that show up: David, Gad, and Nathan. But flip over then to verse. This is verse 35 of chapter 29. Thus the service of the house of the Lord was restored. And so now that the service of the house of the Lord is restored, the next thing that Hezekiah tackles is the Passover, and that's at chapter 30. Look at verse 6. So couriers went throughout all Israel and Judah with letters from the king and his princes, and the king had commanded, saying, O people of Israel, look at the language, return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, that he may turn again to the remnant of you. Now this, again, what has happened to the people? Well, chapter 29 and verse 6, they turned their backs. And so Hezekiah is saying, turn again to the Lord, that he may turn to you. And who's he speaking to? Don't miss this. He's speaking to the remnant. And let's look at verse 9. For if you return to the Lord, your brothers and your children will find compassion with their captors and return to this land. For the Lord your God is gracious and merciful, and will not turn away his face from you if you return to him. So the couriers went from city to city throughout the country of Ephraim and Manasseh, as far as Zebulun, but they laughed them to scorn, and they mocked them. Remember this, restoration of proper worship comes oftentimes with difficulty. But what would you rather have? And this is the plight of Israel. Hezekiah knows this, and he wants the people to know this. What would you rather have? Turning your face towards the Lord, even though that means scorn from others, or having the Lord scorn you? And of course, it's better to have the scorn and reproach of men than to ever have the scorn and reproach of God. Look at verse 18. For a majority of the people, many of them from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, Zebulun, had not cleansed themselves, yet they ate the Passover otherwise than as prescribed. For Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, May the good Lord pardon everyone who sets his heart to seek the Lord, the God of his fathers, even though not according to the sanctuary's rules of cleanliness. Now wait just a minute. I thought he was restoring proper worship. He is restoring proper worship. Proper worship, remember, as the Bible has told us since the beginning, is a matter of the heart. What good is it to clean the outside of the cup if the inside is still dirty? And verse 20, the Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people. 27, let's close our Old Testament reading. Then the priest and the Levites arose, blessed the people, and their voice was heard, and their prayer came to his holy habitation in heaven. They turned to God, God turned to them. But really, it's not so much their turning to God as it is this God who prescribed the way for them to walk, who made himself available even unto them. God always takes the initiative. How we respond oftentimes determines his response. But thankfully in Jesus Christ, he has responded to us definitely through his Son, Jesus Christ. Now, let's turn to 1 Corinthians 7. And this is that passage, of course, that is a little tender, but it's important for us because we realize that there is a certain way of living that is living unto Christ, and there's a certain way of living that is under Christ's yoke. Look at this passage. Now, concerning matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. That's what they wrote. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. Look at this complementarian relationship between the man and the woman. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Now don't stop there, men. Look at the next. Likewise, the husband doesn't have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Look at the balance. Don't deprive one another, except perhaps for an agreement for a limited time that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you. Who's the you? Is that just the man? No, it's the man and the woman. And so he says, Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Verse 8, he speaks to the unmarried. Verse 10, to the married. Verse 12, to the rest. And then he goes, verse 17, let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him. Now, that's not a free-for-all. That's living a life under what has already been said. And of course, he says in verse 23, reminds them, you were bought with a price. Don't become bondservants of men. Of course, in 25, to the betrothed. And then in 32, he speaks this word that we could talk about for longer, but we just don't have time in this podcast today. Psalm 26, tie this in with what we learned from Hezekiah, what we learned with our bodies being a temple. O Lord, I love the habitation of your house and the place where your glory dwells. And believer, remember this. Through Christ, where does the glory of God dwell? Here's the rich truth of the gospel. It dwells in you. The glory of God now dwells in you. And that's all because you were bought with a price.